This week on the Legion Clubhouse. Ah, crap. We're doing the Wanderers again.
They were the heroes from the future. Teenagers protecting the universe from those that would sow the seeds of chaos. Each had unique powers and abilities. And though they often had their differences, they came together to save the day as the Legion of Superheroes. Now, you can be a part of their adventures and learn the history of the future in the Legion Clubhouse.
Matthew, it is a time to live, perhaps a time to die. And I love the opening comment from Brainiac 5. What conspiracy? A conspiracy between me, Duo Damsel, Saturn Girl, and the rest? Why, I have no idea what you're talking about. Trust me on this, bro.
Sometimes that Jim Shooter theory of make sure that we say the character's name as quickly as possible just doesn't work. I will say this issue, I don't remember this issue being what it is, but I remember.
What do you mean by
going,
remember it being what it is?
Well, and here's the thing. You always, you kind of have a memory of specific arcs,
sure.
Right?
Uh-huh.
And I remember like this part of the conspiracy arc when I originally read it in the 80s. But I don't remember it, A, being guest art, and B, I don't remember it being quite so unpleasant.
Unpleasant in which way? Because I'm trying to I'm trying to see if you're in the same mental space that I am when you're talking about this.
Like, okay, so the conspiracy makes sense up to a point, and the four characters involved in the conspiracy all have valid reasons to feel like they need to do what they're doing to get back at the time trapper.
Right.
But we've seen Brainiac become very emotional in the past. This issue, most of what Brainiac does in this issue is rage and cry and smash things, and the anger, just like the flat out belligerence at their fellow Legionnaires. Mon-El literally picks up an enormous piece of machinery and threatens to crush Projectra with it.
Yeah, I think there's a quote here in the from Brainiac 5 where he says, "The Legion bylaws don't say anything about committing crimes, so therefore your favorite Legion member, me, will do all the crimes I want. Saturn Girl has said I can do whatever I want." Because that's the way it comes off, is they are doing things they know are not in line with Legion code. And they are essentially saying, damn Legion code. If we want to commit crimes against the Time Trapper, we will commit crimes against the Time Trapper.
And I think it really is important to keep in mind that they're talking about the murder of Superboy. Yeah. And the underlying concept here, the greatest hero of them all, killed in his prime, not Superboy Prime, that's a different schmuck, but killed in his prime. They have decided, the four of them, that they are going to execute the Time Trapper in revenge. They have decided that they are going to initiate the death penalty for one of their villains. And aside from the fact that Brainiac himself says it's impossible to even get to him, much less figure out how they're going to kill him, it's interesting to me to just see these characters when they've made this decision. It's a momentous decision, especially on the part of Mon-El, especially on the part of Saturn Girl, both of whom have been real hard cases for 30-odd years about the Legion code. Both of them are everyone in here is a multiple-time Legion leader, except for Duo Damsel. And Duo Damsel is like, well, I really, really liked him when he showed up, and he was very cute. And, more power to her. Lornu, your heart is more powerful than Mon-El Sideburns, and we grant you that. But it really is, it's ugly. It is just ugly to see these characters doing these, and especially in the context of the late 80s, doing these things where this is a point in comics history where, the Dark Knight Returns has changed everything. This is a point in comics history where Watchmen has come out, where Wolverine is now the most popular character, and that the idea of a hero killing is no longer the big deal that it would have been in 61, 62. Much to the lament and chagrin of Starboy, who, by the way, I'm almost certain quit the Legion because he saw this coming. He's like, you know what? These guys are going to go kill somebody. And they threw me off the team not 5 years ago or however long it's been.
So we are still a year away from the U.S. invasion of Panama, to bring things back around to more current political issues. But at the time, it felt very much like the United States. Now, please don't get me wrong, dear listeners. I'm not saying Noriega was a good fellow and we should have left well enough alone. But when we take it upon ourselves to become the police of the world and invade Panama to take Noriega out, that is almost like what we're seeing here. We are justified because we are the Legion. We are the good guys. We are justified in doing what we are about to do. And we don't owe an explanation to anybody, not to the President of the United Planets, not to the UPF, not to the science police, nobody. We will do what we want to do. And at that point, essentially, that is what they're saying. I mean, they don't necessarily come out and say, hey, the Supreme Court said I can do whatever I want to do. They don't necessarily come right out and say it, but they get very, very close. And at that point, if I was the United Planets, I might be rethinking the Legion Charter.
You know, that is something I had not considered because it's in the air in 1988. You are absolutely right. I mean, that was Operation Just Cause.
Yeah.
Like
they we want to.
They're literally saying, hey, we're going to invade a sovereign nation. We're going to do what we need to do because they're evil. And if they're evil enough, our tactics being equally, I don't necessarily want to say evil, but our tactics being equally, illegal, our tactics being equally immoral don't matter. And I feel like that is a very important part of what we see in the 80s, because we see that change in comics. We go from 1982, I think it was, where in Superman 2, he almost was going to he was going to kill Zod, and he didn't, and he held back. And then we get to 1989, where literally Superman does kill Zod on panel, and it's like, that's why I now have a code against killing. And I feel like the breakdown, the time frame in between there. In reality, once again, we do try to talk about these in context, but sometimes that context.
Well, but I mean, we are seeing that seeing that speed up. I mean, all the players are there. Tip O'Neill is there. You've got what's his name, white-haired dummy. Well, you've got Cheney there. You've got Mitch McConnell. You've got Schiff. You've got all the players who are in there who are very much understanding that. And again, this is 1988. The wall hasn't come down yet, but Reagan has done his glasnost tear down the wall speech. And so
the war on drugs is in full effect.
Yeah. How'd that turn out, Matthew? This war on the time trapper. We're going to declare a war on the time trapper.
Well, let me put it to you this way. If I travel 90 miles in any direction, 90? The rules change. That's all I'm saying.
How about 100 feet in any direction? And you can probably get some illicit fentanyl without even swinging a dead cat. I mean, you are in Topeka, Kansas. So
a couple of years ago, we were sitting in the Sonic drive-thru, and a car pulled up next to me, and the windows in the car were down, and I got a whiff of it, and I went, oh. And the child next to me, 18 years old, mind you, goes, oh. And I'm like, oh. And then we had to have a discussion about that, but that was fine. That's fine. So that's how that went. Anyway.
Yeah, but that's not a war on drugs, though, because somebody's obviously smoking right next to it.
Somebody lost it.
Somebody smoked their crack pipe right next to Matthew's daughter. So it was
fine.
Okay, so just real quick before we get into, so I think we've said enough about this insane plan to go after the time trapper, right? How about the insane hairstyles of Brainiac 5 on page 2, where he goes from the normal Brainiac hairstyle to some Beach Boy blowout surfer dude hairstyle on the same page. Somebody, in this case, Pat Broderick, Doesn't know what the heck he's doing.
Broderick, now honestly, I want to say this. Broderick has been on Legion before, and you hated him then.
Yeah.
During the Bronze Age. But Broderick really brings a couple of things to this issue that I've been missing. The stiffness of those DeCarlo figures is much less here. So I feel like it is definitely the synthesis of the two of them. But if you look at what Broderick does in those first few pages, aside from that, where it actually looks like somebody went in and may have like inked over
I think
the face.
I think that's what happened. I was wondering if that was supposed to be maybe Cosmic Boy as a reaction, or not Cosmic Boy, Mon-El as a reaction shot, and they changed it out. But it's really weird.
It looks like an altered panel, but it also looks like Brainiac has not washed his hair in 6 months, which kind of makes sense because he's been obsessed.
He's been in the lab.
Yeah, he's been locked in the lab. He probably smells like a goat. It's fine. But we do have that inconsistency from panel to panel.
Oh yeah, I mean, look at Dawnstar on the page 4, right, where her thighs are proportional to her body, and then her calves just balloon out until they are larger than her thighs, and then her feet shrink down to these little teeny tiny nubs on the end of her legs. It's weird, man. It really is weird. And then on top of that, I'm not really a fan of. I think Mike DeCarlo is doing the inking here. I'm not really a fan of the hatching shading that he has going on in this issue. It's somewhat distracting overall, and I'm not a big fan of it.
I think we're seeing another bit where the synthesis of the two creators is a problem, because Pat Broderick is a hatchy kind of. When he's inking himself, he does lots of long, lithe, kind of weird figures. Not like Rob Liefeld crazy, but definitely tall, skinny people.
Yeah.
And if you look at his run on Captain Atom, which would have probably either just ended or is about to end in '88, it definitely is kind of an elongated thing. And he does use a lot of cross hatching and lighting effects. And it's something that I don't think Mike DeCarlo, whichever DeCarlo, this is Mike DeCarlo.
Yeah.
I don't think Mike DeCarlo is actually the guy to ink that kind of style, because if you look at Dawnstar's fringes, look how thick and chunky they are.
Yeah. Or even go and look at Shrinking Violet on page 15. I mean, she's got like elongated man neck.
And I think to some degree Pat Broderick draws really long necks, but it's also a question of Broderick pencils with DeCarlo inks, kind of what we see with that DeCarlo. Because you remember, was the guy who was drawing a big chunk of your favorite Flash run back during those Wade days. was the guy right before, not Umberto, but the guy who before Umberto, whose name escapes me, who was in there. But LaRocque was in there throughout the return of Barry Allen. And he does have kind of wild and wacky figures, but they're not as thick and chunky in Flash. And that's partly because you've got DeCarlo doing the inks here. So I feel like it's weird.
There's a lot of inconsistencies, and the parts of it look really great. Like we have Chameleon Boy and Colossal Boy realizing they're both undercover and they're both there to get the other out. And then, of course, Starfinger bursts in, and he kind of looks like Jack Kirby amid all those Kirby dots in there. It's a really weird, but he's like, haha, I figured you guys out, Colossal Boy. And he's blowing up Colossal Boy, and he's threatening Chameleon Boy, and he's got them both trapped. I mean, those are some pretty cool scenes where he's holding their limp, unconscious bodies. And I'm like, okay, I can dig this stuff. And some of the cool explosion stuff, like when Chameleon Boy turns into a bird and is trying to get around, all those things are really, really neat and cool. But then again, we get right back into another panel with, what are we on, page 19, where it's just inconsistent Brainiac 5 hairdos.
But also the layouts are more creative. I feel like the layouts are more creative than
I was wondering that because traditionally we have traditionally we've had very traditional layouts in this book. But this is and I think it's probably been going on subtly to the point where I didn't notice it. But this is one of the first times where I'm starting to notice we're seeing a lot of overlapping panels in our layouts. And I really was surprised by that because I was like, okay, I guess either I haven't been paying attention, and I'm sure the listeners are like, you're right, you haven't been paying attention, idiot. But it just really seems like the overlapping panel action is more pronounced here.
I think it is, and I blame that. Well, I don't blame that. I attribute that to Broderick because LaRock does very.
I like it. I like overlapping panels. I think it's cool.
What's a way to say pedestrian without seeming like I'm being judgy?
I think the Youngs. What is it the Youngs are saying today on the bass? They're saying it's very bass.
Based. Yeah, I don't think that's a thing. But yeah, it definitely is partly the Broderick thing, although I am mad about the splash page.
Why?
I am mad about the splash page.
The opening splash page?
The opening splash page where Projectra busts into the lab.
Yeah.
And you're
but
like,
she traditionally doesn't have
a woman in a mask.
She doesn't traditionally have super strength, right?
No. Well, no, she doesn't. But also, she doesn't traditionally have a balcony you can do Shakespeare on. And
I just noticed that. I guess I didn't know. I've read this like 3 or 4 times. I've read this 3 or 4 times, and I guess I'm just now noticing. Yeah, it's Brainiac keeps his lab rather cold. That's funny. I guess I just have never noticed that. Which is odd because you do get a nice or nice.
It is. And that's Broderick. That's
when
definitely
you see
Broderick.
Dawn Star on another page and you see her full from behind and you see her full behind, that's there too. I guess I just wasn't paying attention to those kinds of things, which is fine. I do have a couple of other.
You don't expect it in a Legion book, but you also don't usually get it. Legion book.
I would say we did run through a whole period in the 70s where everyone was wearing, small bikinis as their outfits and basically running around nude. So I'm going to have to disagree with you there, but I was not expecting that on that splash page.
You usually don't get it circa the 80s after Gift. So
Yeah.
Grell Legionnaires were naked all the time, but yeah.
There was another thing that I thought was rather funny when Colossal Boy and a Chameleon Boy are undercover and they're asking for one more day to get this problem solved. They don't say I need one more day. They say I need 1 day more, and that's an odd phrasing to say that until you realize that Les Mis opened in Broadway in 1987 and would have been a huge hit and success by 1988.
Oh, like that Les Miserables?
Yep. 1 day more.
I've seen that, and let me tell you, I don't know why they call it that, because they just keep getting more and more miserable all the way out.
Yep. Let's see.
You're right. 1 day more. The Broadway cast recording would have hit the record stores.
Well, and considering that everybody here, so Les Mis opened in France and in England in the early 80s, 1980s, and it took a while for it to come over. It didn't get great reviews when it was in Europe, when it opened over there. But when it hit in Broadway in 87, that's when people seemed to go nuts for it. And I would imagine since DC headquartered in New York in the 80s, I would guess that a lot of these people might have gone to see the musical that was much better than Cats, and they probably went to go see it again and again. But I just thought that was a weird thing, and it just triggered it. I enjoy Les Mis. I just watched the movie adaptation not too long ago. And just that song, 1 day more, just triggered me to say, that's a weird phrasing. Let me look up and see when that musical hit. And so just under a year before this issue came out.
That's funny. Yeah, DC headquarters would have been on Broadway in 87.
Yeah, they would have been at 666 Broadway. Well, you know whose family owns that building, right? The Kushners.
Is it your favorite Legionnaire?
It's Jared Kushner's dad, or maybe even Jared Kushner. It switched over to him. So DC was housed in that building when the Kushners owned it.
Kushner. I hardly.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So okay. So with Princess Projectra, she's got super strength. She apparently has some kind of ESP. She also knows that Ron Vidar is not dead?
Yes, because, and this is very important, Sensor Girl has the ability not just to see through things. It's not like X-ray vision. Sensor Girl can sense things that are or not true. So she senses, she can tell, she can feel the hidden part of the plan. The conspiracy's hidden part, and she says it out loud, is they have vowed to kill the time trapper or die trying, and they are all willing to die to do this. And so she does something that, again, only she knows because of her senses, and she goes to her old friend who is not dead, and we'll find out more about that. But it's funny. It's funny. You notice how she finds him in that green area and she points out, I've never seen so much green on Earth, even in this day and age.
Poison ivy is still alive in the 29th and a half century. Also, I note that Brainiac 5 essentially is admitting, because the implication is in the way that Brainiac 5 speaks in this, is all of the time travel that they have done has always been to the pocket dimension, and that the time trapper was manipulating them. And in reality, time travel doesn't exist, or what he thought was time travel doesn't exist.
Yeah, essentially, he has come to the realization that pretty much his signature feat, the thing that he is known for, other than being a genius Legionnaire, the creation of the time bubble, breaking the time barrier, that never happened. He was being manipulated all along. And, at that point, I understand when he collapses in tears, because he's basically been told, this kid's what, 26, 27?
I mean, 180. I think he's 89 or 189.
In my mind, I look at the elder Legionnaires, the Adventure Comics era Legionnaires. So your Brainiacs, your Saturn Girls, your Lightning lads and lasses, your Mons L, 26 years old, because they've been Legionnaires for 8 years.
Yeah, they were teenagers. Yeah.
And the new kids are like 16, 17. Magnetic Kid, like 17. He's a little schmendrick.
Yeah.
But Brainiac is basically a person who has become an adult. His frontal lobe is fully intact at this point, and he feels like, I am ahead of where I should have been. I invented time travel. And then they're like, no, you didn't.
Which
brings up him.
Which brings up a whole plethora of questions, because you have the Time Travel Institute, you have Karate Kid going back in time, you have Cosmic Boy and Nightshade going back in time. Did they actually go back in time? What about Booster Gold? If the time bubble never worked, how does Booster Gold show up in a comic book page in 1986?
All of the time travel that we've seen was, at this point, at least Legion-related time travel. So travel back to the past has all been at the whim of the time trapper. And
so we can decide whether they went to the main DCU timeline or if they went to the pocket dimension timeline.
He has control of time. He basically says, you're going back in time.
I guess my understanding in reading this was... No, I guess my understanding in reading this and going back to when they were fighting the time trapper and he pulls the big reveal with the bubble universe was that all the time travel that they've been doing was to that pocket dimension. And it seemed like the way Brainiac was breaking down here was that he was confirming they were all going to this pocket dimension, which then brings up the question of, again, how does Booster Gold get back to 1986 in a time bubble that Brainiac 5 invented? Created. Yeah, see, the crisis cracks continue to appear when you question the comic book continuity.
Oh, yeah. Keep in mind, 0 Hour is not that far away.
Oh, I know. That's what I'm getting. That's what I'm looking forward to. I mean, we are like I think 9 or 8 episodes away from that. From 5 year later Legion, and 5 years later only lasts like a dozen issues or something. Yeah, a dozen issues over 3 years.
Well, they kick in 89. The 5-year gap, Legion goes all the way through the end of 0 Hour. So it does about, not quite 5 years.
Okay. All right.
It does about 60 issues, but there's some stuff in there. And of course, there's some other stuff in there. And DC is weird. And
yeah. This was okay. I think things are getting a little too weird. And again, I would be interested to see why, in addition to Censor Girl busting in, and finally everyone said, you brought a dwarf star down to the planet Earth, why the United Planets or the president aren't on the phone screaming at Brainiac 5, demanding to know the answer. Now, last time on the show, we were questioning, how big is a dwarf star? Is it the size of a watermelon? The smallest dwarf star, I went and looked this up after we were done. Smallest dwarf star is about the size of the Earth. Let that sink in. And then we'll be right back. I have some feedback, Matthew. I've been asking, hey, what do we do with Legion? What would we do with all of these other comic books? I believe it's pronounced RMD says, I would be on the side of including Legion. I'm generally on the side of including crossovers, such as the upcoming Legion stories and Secret Origins. There's also a brief period around 2009 to 2010 where the old Levitz continuity was being used in the Superman books, and it was basically a continuous crossover. It would be a bad idea to ignore the Superman books when you get to that time period. There's also an immediately post-0 Hour run where the Flash and the spinoff Impulse had Tornado Twins, XS, and or 30th Century characters. You probably don't need to cover each issue individually, but you could do something. J. Michael T. says maybe summarize them for awareness. Let's see. Smikey says Impulse was pushed back to the 21st century for reasons, and XS stayed in the 31st century and became the Legionnaires' resident speedster. I think we know that. I think that's what also when Jeff Johns was fully expanding the Speed Force and the Speedster lineup. To an extent, I don't remember if XS was tapping into the Speed Force or not. I can't remember if she was or not.
Well, the Speed Force actually is a Wade creation, and the Speed Force pops up with Max Mercury.
Yeah.
During Wade's run.
I'm just trying to remember if she used the Speed Force energy or if it was something else. Because
she did, yes.
We'll get to that. We'll get to it at some point.
It wasn't as pervasive as it is now. It wasn't like everybody has to either explain I use the Speed Force or I don't.
I just use the secret formula.
Right. She was the granddaughter of the Flash, and so she went fast. That's how that works.
Jimbo Fett says, so I'm going to say that you should not go through Legion or Rebels, partly because it's annoying as F to type, but also mostly because soon enough, and I can't believe we're 10 episodes away from 5 years later, there will be the Mothership book and the Legionnaires title, and then plenty of tie-in issues after that. That being said, the last episode was great, and my perspective on the Amalgam Legion wouldn't necessarily... remember I also said, if we were to put the Legion together today, who would you do? Would you, mix Legionnaires from different time periods? So he's calling, Jimbo Fett is calling it the Amalgam Legion. The Amalgam Legion wouldn't necessarily be go back to X version, although I'd love to revisit the reboot version, but more a pull all the unique characters into one Legion approach, so you could basically have the OG team with the new rebooters, Gates, XS, Kinetics, etc. I thought that's the approach Levitz would take in the 2010 book, but he ended up pulling in new newbies that no one liked. Yeah, okay. And the Dark Side Legion seems to be its own thing, as it has Kid Quantum 2 among its members, as we'll hopefully get more info about that soon. I thought that was interesting to get some feedback from some of our listeners. RMD says, same for Wanderers. Do one episode for the whole Wanderer series. Secret Origins probably does deserve treating the Legion-related issues individually. I believe they were written by regular Legion of Superhero writers anyway. So there you go. And listeners, if you're wondering, where is all this fascinating conversation taking place? Of course, it's taking place over on the Major Spoilers Discord server, which you can join absolutely free. Then jump into the Legion Clubhouse channel, and you can chat away with all the fantastic people that are hanging out right there.
If you enjoy the show, we would appreciate your support. You can find out more and become a Legion Clubhouse member at patreon.com/major spoilers.
Wanderers, why? Why?
Well, I tell you.
She's attacking us with emotions.
Yes, she is. So, as we said last time on the Legion Clubhouse, the Wanderers do have a few, I don't want to say important, but they do have a few meaningful Legion interactions. And this one, issue 3, we did skip over 2, which is duller than dirt. I feel like, though, this one features the Legion finding out that the Wanderers are alive.
Okay, so this is the problem. So there's these gremlins. Gremlins was released in 1984, by the way. There are all these gremlins running around and taking control of people's lives. And remember, I said this Psych has a thing in episode 1 where the thing's jumping out of her belly and freaking everyone out. And so we kind of find out how that's tied into this. But here's the thing that, again, just like in the issue that we just reviewed, we don't care about the Constitution. We don't care about our bylaws. We're going to go and kill this MFer, and you guys can't do anything about it. In this one, we already know that cloning has been outlawed. We know that cloning is against the law, and yet the minute that the Legion members find out, oh, you're clones, they kind of just shrug their shoulders and go, huh, that's weird, instead of immediately incinerating these things for being, crimes against humanity.
Well, I feel like it's illegal to make clones. I don't know that it is immediately worthy of the death penalty to be a clone. I mean, that seems like we may be a tiny, tiny bit of overreach if we were just to incinerate them. Although you do have wildfire. So, I mean, if any Legionnaire was going to, he'd be the one.
The Legion go in and burn these gremlins to death. They also drop like a whole building on them and melt it to slag to get the main creature out. This is not granted, if the Legion are going to start killing, that's fine, whatever. They're, essentially authorized police force to use whatever justice they deem fit. No one has ever tried to stop them. Why should they? But they are literally killing these gremlins on panel. Lightning Lass and Wildfire.
Wildfire and the White Witch.
Yeah, they're just like eviscerating these things on panel, page 15, 19, something like that. You just see these little gremlins on fire and burning as Lightning Lass just incinerates these things to a crisp. And then you have Wildfire saying, melt this whole thing to slag and destroy this thing. And then he pops out safe, and we find out that one escaped. And it's all going to start again.
I think that we, and by we I mean you, but I think that it's easy for readers to look at these bipedal creatures and say, these are sentient aliens. And I feel like the story is saying more that that God help us, they're more like they're vermin, and it feels like a public health thing to destroy them because, as you recall in issue 1, the Wanderers were found dead with those crystals floating around them.
Yeah.
Those crystals are apparently the aliens' blood. Yeah, and then they grow new aliens. But at no point do we see the aliens trying to communicate or talk. The aliens can say things, but it's more like
they're controlling people's minds, right? I mean, that's what they're doing is doing that. But they're
treating them like animals. And I feel like the story is trying to make the case that
genocide of an extinction of an entire species also does not sit well with me, especially when, again, these are bipedal creatures that, for all intents and purposes, by controlling other beings, that they are, in a sense, sentient. I don't know. There is very little regard for killing these things. They're just like, let's burn these things to the ground.
And
I mean, would you be okay? Would you be okay if the Legion were just like, look, everybody, a puppy mill. We must burn down the puppy mill and all the puppies inside. You would probably you probably would have a freak out about that. There would be people up in arms about this.
Necessarily the problem in a puppy mill. Like,
oh no, okay. The puppies are definitely a problem, because if you've looked into their little chocolate eyes and they're looking up with you with sadness, they latch into your brain and control you, and you're like, oh, maybe we can take one home. Maybe we can take a second puppy home as well. Maybe, I guess we can take a third. And then the next thing you know, you've got puppies all over the place. Puppies out of control.
101 on your puppy Dalmatian plantation.
Yeah.
But let me put it to you this way. You have in the room with you a small feline that domesticated you.
Oh no, he left. He was tired of all this nonsense. He's like, I'm not hanging around with you nerds if you're going to continue to talk about genocide of dogs.
Somewhere.
First you start with the genocide of dogs, and then I'm next.
Is a little black and white idiot who has domesticated our family. And they are, they're animals, they're creatures, they're, even Dipstick, who's a terrible worst pet. I don't know about sentience. They are definitely living creatures. But here's the thing. The city of Topeka, where I live, has a massive feral cat program. And while they try to catch them and relocate them, they do, in some cases, actually have to destroy some of those feral cats. Not
the entire feline population.
I get it, but stay with me on this. So
I'm just
those animals.
These animals.
I'm just saying, but those animals with their instincts get to a point where they threaten, even if they are, smart. Like the cat will look at the clock and then meow and look at the clock and tell you that it's time to feed him. That's a pretty smart thing. I would not call him a sentient being. I would say that he is an animal. And I feel like this story tries to give us the baseline. And I will give Moench credit for that. These creatures are treated as kind of predators. So they are intelligent predators, and they're trying to manipulate Psyche and use Psyche to manipulate others with her powers. But really, they are like parasites in a lot of ways. And I think Lightning Lass actually calls them parasites. And so
that's just because they keep borrowing money off of her and asking to drive the car.
Your concerns are not invalid. And I want you to know that your lived experience.
I just feel like I feel like the only reason that the Legion are in this book is because by the second issue, sales dropped off so much that they're like, holy crap, we need to boost the sale of this new series by putting in guest stars. And the only guest stars in the future are the Legion of Superheroes. It feels like a stunt. It feels like a stunt thing, especially when there were so many better comics that could have been released following the DC implosion that never got out. They could have released those instead.
Most of those had been released by 87. That was 10 years ago. So here's the thing that you need to know. In 1988, they probably didn't know how issue 1 sold yet. It was not like an instantaneous thing. And it is common throughout the Bronze Age for the second or third issue to have, hey, Spider-Man, or hey, Batman. But it was even then, issue 1 would have big sales. Issue 2, usually you expect half the sales of that. And depending, you might expect half of the sales of that for issue 3. So it was, a known tactic to pump up issue 3 with the big name cameo or the guest appearance. And you're right. That's why the Legion is here. But it's not because they knew that sales would be soft. It's because they expected that sales could be soft. And honestly, I don't think anybody was editing this book because this is not a good comic. But
it really isn't. I got to this and I was just like, why?
And I was reading through this, and Hoover, God love him, Dave Hoover is an artist. And whenever I think of Dave Hoover, I say to myself, Dave Hoover is one of DC's artists. And all of these character designs are the most aggressively late 80s, 90s things I've ever seen. Like Psyche has a ball gown, but it's all filled with, she's got big boots and she's got earrings and her hair is all popped up. And Aviax is 6 feet tall with a 4 foot wide thing that's supposed to look like wings coming off of his shoulder
pads or whatever. Yeah. It's all weird.
Yeah. These guys are like the distillation of everything that's wrong with the decades to come, and the characters from which some of these are probably going to be evil. Everything that you say, oh, what do you think about when you think 90 comics? Tiny bikinis? Quantum Queen is wearing a super tiny bikini. Guys with big shoulders and guns. Well, there you got your Reanimage. He's got shoulder pads. Everybody's got their, pouches on their belt. Elvar is a little guy, but a little guy with a big, big sword, and he's full of
not
rage.
Overcompensating. Yeah,
right. And this issue does something that makes me very mad.
Which is?
So one of the main characters, the leader of the Wanderers, Reanimage, formerly known as Immorto, which, by the way, better name.
Yeah,
Immorto is a better name. He sees his team, and Psyche is being controlled by one of the little beasties, and she attacks the team, and Elvar attacks Psyche and kills her. But it's okay because Reanimage can bring you back from the dead. He's not just immortal. It's not that he can't be killed. He can share his can't be killed with you. And all it does is really emphasize the lack of death in comics. And it makes, I feel like this is the point where the characters die every 20 minutes and come back to life immediately afterwards. This is where it starts. Not Reanimage specifically, but this kind of plot point where we're trying to merge the 60s comics, that Silver Age nostalgia, everybody lives forever, with, there's real consequences and there's real death. But all it really does is remind you, well, there isn't.
Yeah, no, I get it. Whatever. You don't have to justify why Wanderers are here. I get it. Yeah, no, I just, it's a horrible.
Hey, I'm not making you read all of them.
Well, yeah, because I'd be like, no, we're canceling the whole Legion Clubhouse if we have to read.
I'm aware. I don't want the show to go under. I'm just like, but there are.
Speaking of hoping to make sure this show doesn't go under, dear listener, if you want to make sure this show continues all the way past 5 years later and into the really good Legion stuff, then you want to head over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/major spoilers. Patreon.com/major spoilers. Sign up for like $2 a month, $5 a month, not per episode. We don't charge per episode. In fact, Patreon doesn't allow you to charge per episode, but you're going to get, for your $5 a month, you're going to get, over the course of the year, actually, if you sign up for a full year in advance, you get a discount. But over the course of the year, we will have roughly 25 to 27 episodes of this show released, and $5 a month can keep it going. Speaking of going, we have to go. But next week on the show, yes, more Wanderers, but our final Wanderers issue that we're going to read. Also, we're going to find out what happens when the Legion finally crack the code and another victim is claimed. Who will it be? Could it be the Time Trapper? I don't know, dear listeners, but in a couple of weeks, probably next month, we will hit the big Legion of Superheroes annual number 4 right here on the Legion Clubhouse.
The Legion Clubhouse is a production of Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC, and is produced by Steven Schleicher. Your hosts were Matthew Peterson and Steven Schleicher. You can follow Matthew at Mighty King Cobra and Steven at Major Spoilers. You can follow this podcast on Twitter at Legion Clubhouse. If you have questions or comments, send them to podcast@majorspoilers.com. I'm Jason Inman. Until next time, eat it, Grandpa.
This podcast is copyright 2025 by Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC.